Hello, and welcome to SciShow Talk Show, a special edition. It's that day on SciShow where we talk to interesting people about interesting things. Today we're talking to Gina McCarthy, former head of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and current director of the Center for Climate, Health, and the Global Environment at Harvard. Gina, hi, how are you?
Hank, I'm great. Thanks for having me on. This is so much fun.
We've talked before,
Yes.
which seems like, how does this happen to me? But it's great, and I'm very excited to be doing it. I want to start out with a kind of big picture thing here. So we're both worried about the environment, human impacts on the environment. I think that perspective can often come from a sort of like people are so bad, we are so terrible, we have messed so many things up kind of perspective. We are great at creating problems, but we're also good at solving problems. Do you think that we don't spend enough time talking about how we have been able to solve problems both environmentally and, for the last 200,000 years of our history?
Well, absolutely. I think people tend to have a bit of a short memory because I have lived long enough that I kind of remember when pollution was spewing out of smokestacks and our rivers were running different colors depending upon what industry was putting in the river at the time. But we just don't see that anymore. And I think there's two things going on here, Hank. I think people don't see the problems today like they used to because they're not as visible, but they're there. And when you get to issues like climate change, it just seems so big and monumental that people think we can't make the kind of incremental progress that brings solutions to the table. And they're wrong. Because today I see solutions that I never dreamed of before. And we have to give ourselves a little bit of a break. Stop being afraid and start really just recognizing that we have opportunities today to make the world a remarkably healthy and sustainable place. And that's what we got to shoot for.
Can we talk a little bit about some of the problems in the last 50 years even, that just like we don't even have to think about anymore?
Well, we don't have to think about having lead in our gasoline anymore. We don't have to think about those old glass mercury thermometers that used to break and we played with all the silver stuff that probably attributes to my career in some way. There's lots of pollutants that we don't worry about in our water anymore. We're not that worried about dengue fever here. We're not worried so much about malaria. Think about all of the things that other countries still worry about that in the United States we've gotten out of the picture. And I think the challenge is to keep us hopeful and focused on solution sets moving forward.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up both like leaded gasoline, which in my head, like we think about that as an environmental problem.
Right.
And then you bring up also dengue fever. And in my head, we think about that as a global health problem.
Yeah.
But of course, like having lead in the air is bad for the environment, but it's also a global health problem.
It sure
and
is.
When we're talking about these things, we're often not talking about like, we talk about saving the planet, but we're not gonna destroy Earth. It's a big rock in space. It's gonna be okay with or without us. We're talking about how, like, and it's in the title of your organization, global health and the environment. Are like when we're talking about environment, we're talking about health. We're talking about better lives for human beings.
I have been working in the field of the environment for 37 years. And I have really been focusing all that time on public health, on human beings. The Environmental Protection Agency says environment in it, but it's really about, not so much birds and bunnies or polar bears. It's sort of kids. It's fixing our natural resources, reducing pollution, but we do it with the end goal of reducing risks to human health, saving lives. And US EPA has been enormously successful in doing that. And to me, it's underpinned a growing economy because it's brought new technologies to the table, new solutions, cleaner cars, industries that don't spew mercury into the air that gets into our fish, that gets into our kids or our pregnant women. There's all kinds of successes there that make me very hopeful for the future, including the challenge of climate change.
We also sometimes think of climate change as a problem that we have to solve, and that it's just like out there, untouched, unworked on. But I think that, like, I like to think of us as at this point being in the progress of solving this problem.
Yeah.
It's not something that we have to get started on. It's something that we started on 10 or 20 years ago in a lot of cases, both in terms of understanding it and preparing for the changes that might come, but also in preparing new technologies. So I see this as a problem that we are in the process of solving, not one that we need to solve.
That's true. I mean, it's a little bit of both, but I think
Mm-hmm.
part of the problem that we have been facing is that, when you talk about saving the planet, people think it's too daunting a task for any one individual to really do. And so
Yeah.
they sort of push that aside. And so what we really need to do, and what I'm trying to do at Harvard, is make the very direct connection that climate change is a public health problem. And if you focus on public health as a way to get to the issues of climate change, you will be able to make health better today and
Mm-hmm.
create a sustainable future and a healthier planet tomorrow. That's what I want to do. And so
Mm-hmm.
we have learned so much about the dangers of, for example, air pollution. And we know that heat and all the hot weather and all of climate change impacts will make air pollution worse for so many millions of people. And it's always the same people that get hit the hardest, the vulnerable communities. So
Mm-hmm.
instead of talking to developing countries that they have to fix what they perceive as the developing world's problem of climate change, and instead we said, let's clean up that air pollution problem for you today, what you end up doing is reducing coal generation in their
Mm-hmm.
utilities, getting rid of those old cook stoves that spew black carbon. So what you end up doing is actually raising people to be healthier today, getting them
Mm-hmm.
more active in society because they are healthier, addressing and bringing people out of poverty into the middle class. And by the way, you're fixing climate change. So what are we arguing about here? I feel like all the arguments about climate change are all about why are we rushing towards a healthier, more sustainable future. Let's think about that. Let's just sit here and dwell in the pollution. What are we arguing about? I really don't understand it. Yes,
Yeah,
there
I
will
mean,
be shifts in the way we do business, but throughout history, there
right.
always has been. While we've
Yeah.
learned, while we've innovated, let's get over it and start working on these things.
It's remarkable to sort of witness these shifts as renewable power actually becomes inexpensive and becomes reaches parity in some places and in some times of the day. Even a shift to natural gas being
Yeah.
better than coal actually being really the thing that is bringing down the coal industry, where the coal industry was much more worried about the kinds of regulations that would make it more expensive for them to produce power. In fact, it was another fossil fuel that they had to be worrying
Right.
about.
Yeah.
And the fact that we are now living in a world where coal power plants that were designed to produce power for 50 years aren't going to live that long. They're just not going to be around for their full lifespans is remarkable. Being here at this moment where uh, for both economic and I think somewhat intentional reasons, we're moving away from these things in a way that most people, I would say, recognize is a net positive for the country and the world.
Absolutely. And so I go out and give a lot of speeches, as you can imagine, because people are worried about what's going on in Washington. They're worried about the dismantling of some of the rules that we did in the Obama administration that are moving the car industry to cleaner, more efficient cars, that are
Mm-hmm.
continuing to push the utilities to make sure that they invest in our future, that they look at diminishing the amount of greenhouse gases they emit. All these things are important, like the potential withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. But I think I blow
Mm-hmm.
people's minds when I go to them and tell them, listen, stop focusing on Washington, D.C. Look at what's happening in the real world. The central government
Mm-hmm.
here, the federal government, may have decided to take a pass for a while. But clean energy is thriving in the United States because
Mm-hmm.
it's in the market. And it's going to continue no matter what actually happens in Washington, D.C. And I know the
Mm-hmm.
car companies always quibble and don't like standards until someone decides that they want to change them. Now they're pulling back and saying, they weren't really that bad. Let's just look at
Yes.
tweaks right now. So we are moving in an incredibly positive direction. Investment
Yeah.
is going. What I just want to do is make sure that if we're investing in our future, don't leave people behind. Think about how you look at the challenge of sustainability through a public health lens so that
Hmm.
you're building momentum, broadening the efforts, making science actionable in a way that's really going to bring everybody to the table, in a way
Yeah.
that's positive and grows the economy. And we honestly have to think about people that are left behind in
Yeah.
transitions in the economy. I agree with that, but
Hmm.
we should do that while we don't deny ourselves an ability to have a healthy today and a sustainable future.
When we're looking at, you know, levels of lead in a child's bloodstream, it's
Yeah.
a very obvious, very clear signal, the public health effects of that are very well known. But I think that some of the challenges we're facing today are like very hard to actually see. And it's kind of hard to make that link between public health
Yeah.
and a warmer Earth. Is that like, how do you combat that? How do you bring this into
Yeah.
people's lives?
Well, when I left the federal government, I thought to myself, how do you make systemic change? How
Hmm.
can, I continue to contribute here? And what I realized is in all the times I've been working on environmental issues and public health issues, it's really been public health that's been the driver of all of it. You'd have lead in your gasoline if you didn't have scientists that showed that lead was a neurotoxin. If we didn't
Hmm.
worry about our kids, you'd still not be worried about tobacco smoke. Those
Hmm.
are the kinds of things that we have to do is to make climate change real to everybody. It is the most significant public health challenge that we face. And we have to get it out of the atmosphere and bring it into our families and our homes. So, really, we have to talk about the different health impacts that we're seeing from a changing climate. And that's everything from, more infectious and contagious diseases. You're thinking about droughts and floods that cause not only waterborne problems, but can cause immediate danger to the safety of our communities. You're
Hmm.
talking about a wealth of challenges that we have to public health directly today, like exacerbating the air pollution, which we know contributes to millions of premature deaths. In India alone, it's 1.1 million premature deaths. And this isn't just EPA. This is a new WHO report came out that talks about, the most vulnerable people are always hurt the most. It's
Hmm.
kids, it's the elderly, it's the minority, it's those that don't have good food, it is those in poverty.
Hmm.
And so there's a range of challenges that we see today that are direct public health impacts that I don't want to be here 20 years from now and having somebody say, why didn't you tell me that? Why didn't
Right.
I know that malaria was going to spread farther? Why didn't I
Hmm.
know about Lyme disease spreading? Why didn't I think about what it meant for my kids in their
Hmm.
future? So I'm here at Harvard in this center that we're launching, and it's really to make those connections, but also to talk to people in language they understand. And it's not about scaring them; it's about telling them that we have a path forward. We do
Hmm.
have solutions, but it's going to take everybody to decide that they want to grab them and run with them.
So talked several times now about something I don't know about, which is, does a warmer Earth just on its own create worse
Yeah.
pollution?
Yeah.
So of course, like if your coal power plant is next door and it's not got good scrubbers on it, you're going to have a lot of pollution in your area. But does having more heat
Yes.
just in general
Yeah.
make pollution worse?
It makes pollution worse. That's right. And I mean, well, let me give you a couple of examples. One is in the air side and one is in water.
Okay.
If you actually look at the data, you will see that in the air side, ozone will increase as the temperature gets hotter. We know
Okay.
that's a scientific fact. And ozone contributes to cardiac problems, lung damages, it exacerbates asthma in children. There are
Hmm.
direct public health impacts which we can quantify and show. And that is, as the weather gets warmer, that's what you're going to see. And so we
Hmm.
have to get rid of the pollutants, but we also have to recognize that the world is changing and we have to figure out how to address that. The other is the waterborne issues. And it is a lot about floods and droughts, because in floods and droughts, you see both immediate damage, but you also see contamination of water supplies, which means there's a lasting effect. You don't
Right.
have to look too far to see what's happening in Puerto Rico and how it damages, these storms can damage. But one of the hidden issues is that it really exacerbates waterborne diseases, even when you just have higher heat, because it tends to force people to utilize water supplies that aren't as healthy. It gets kids into water streams and rivers that aren't particularly suitable for swimming. It raises amounts of cholera and other things. And it also forces migrations if it's a long-term issue. So we now have on average 22.5 million people that are living as migrants, that have had to leave places where droughts have forced the changes, or floods have forced those migrations. And if you've ever seen or read about, the places where they end up moving to, always you see diseases follow, increases in infectious and communicable diseases. So it is a challenge directly today to our not just public health, but our national security. That's why these migrations are of such interest to the military, and why they don't deny climate change at all.
Right.
They see it as a real instability issue.
I think that we often overestimate the amount of power that the federal government even has in these things. A lot of this stuff is done without regulation. It is something that is done. It's done by the market. It's done by consumer choice, and it's done by even the choices that business leaders are making. They are deciding to do these things for the good because they want to do good. They're not all. People aren't only out there to make money. They also don't want people to die in their buildings.
Well, I think that most people think that people like me who do rules and regulations think that it's the only way to get anything done, and I just love doing it. You really only regulate when you have a market failure.
Yeah.
When people are impacting somebody else's health and you need government intervention. That's only on very few and select issues. And so we really have to start thinking about what other ways we can change things. Science at the US EPA right now is a very difficult thing to do. And it's being done on purpose because people don't like what science will tell you. So instead, I bet I could go to a business and I could get them to understand that what science means for them and make changes, even without regulating that. Because I know we can, because businesses have done it. If you look at Walmart, they decided that they didn't want to buy baby bottles that had endocrine disrupting chemicals in it. Now, that sounds like a reasonable thing to me. And they decided to do it even though the federal government didn't have the wherewithal to do that. Because it's too hard to make that kind of science assessment, because the layers of work are extreme. So I think we can make change. I think consumers can demand change. You see that all the time when apps are deleted because they don't believe that business shares their values. That's what I'm talking about. That's the change that we can make happen.
And Walmart is so powerful that once they make that decision, nobody's going to make those baby bottles anymore.
Yeah, it just changes.
And that it's sort of a strange thing to have Walmart have that level of power. Back when I was covering environmental technology for a previous job, I would always be like, oh, Walmart's doing it, the conversation is over. Like suppliers, if they can't sell at Walmart, it doesn't matter anymore. It's remarkable how much what power Walmart has. And if you just walk in there and you get them to make that decision, you almost don't, the market is kind of taking care of that problem.
Well, Hank, you are in a generation, and I think a lot of folks that I meet out in the corridors at these graduate schools and undergraduate schools, they are the most tech savvy as well as socially conscious and smartest generation that we have ever had. If we can tap into that energy, if they cannot just be satisfied by being a scientist, and actually be only satisfied when their science is understood and acted on, man, could we change the world? And that's what I want to capture. I think that young people are amazing today. They're not limited in their thinking that they can't change the world. They actually see the world changing all the time. So, so it really distresses me that there are folks that think they can stop change instead of investing in that change and harnessing it for everybody. That's what the world needs to be all about. And I think young people get that. And I think they can deliver it. I just don't want to be the older person that handed them a less than wonderful world complete from what I can do. And I'm not going to give up. I'm not stopping.
Well,
There's other ways in which you can make change happen than working in the federal government.
from my perspective, what I heard from you today, it seems like you would be an excellent director for the Environmental Protection Agency. So,
Well, right now.
so I'm
just
glad that you
about
had that
anybody
job
has
for a
that
fair
job.
amount of time. I won't ask you how you think the EPA is doing now, because I'm sure that's a complicated question.
Well, not really.
I do really appreciate the work that you're doing, and like what I want to say in general is, too often I think my generation will say we are being left such a destroyed world by the generation that came before us. But when my grandfather was working on oil platforms, he wasn't doing that because he wanted to destroy the environment. He was doing that because he wanted a job, but he was also doing it because that was how we created so many wonderful things for people and how we solved a lot of public health problems. And the world got better because of fossil fuels. And that does not mean that we shouldn't move away from them. But this has all been part of the process of humans solving problems and then solving the problems that those solutions caused.
That's right.
That's how it's always going to
That's right.
go.
That's
And
right.
so
And
I appreciate how much you have done from in all of these perspectives over the years, but also that you are continuing and that you see how much can be done outside of the power of government. And I'm
well,
really excited that you're doing that.
well, Hank, in my generation, we used to say knowledge is power, and you got to speak truth to power. And
Absolutely.
I think that's the same thing today. You know, I'm working at a university that has fabulous scientists, and they don't just define problems; they identify solutions. So let's just stop arguing and let's just get to it.
Solving problems. It's it's just what humans are. And then we create new ones, and then we solve those. We can do it. Thank you so much, Gina McCarthy. Thanks for heading up the Center for Climate Health and the Global Environment at Harvard. Thanks for doing all your great work.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Hank. Thanks for having me.